The sterile chrome and glass conference room on the 50th floor of the One Vanderbilt skyscraper was meant to be the final stage for Julian Croft's latest triumph, a swift, clean divorce from his timid wife, Isabella. He smirked, adjusting his Patek Philippe watch, the ticking a countdown to his absolute freedom. His lawyers, a pack of tailored sharks, sat ready with papers that would leave her with a pittance, a mere footnote in his billion-dollar legacy. But as the heavy oak doors swung open, the woman who entered was not the one he remembered. Gone was the demure shadow. In her place stood a figure of chilling composure, her hand resting not on a tissue, but on a worn leather briefcase. In that moment, the ticking of his watch sounded less like a countdown and more like a time bomb, and Julian Croft was about to learn that in the world of the ultra-wealthy, the most dangerous secrets are often bound not in contracts but in blood. Julian Croft believed the world was his personal chessboard, and he its undisputed king. From his perch atop Croft Holdings, a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in everything from tech to real estate, he moved people and assets with the same detached, calculating precision. His life was a meticulously curated collection of victories, the hostile takeovers, the record-breaking IPOs, and of course his marriage to Isabella. To the outside world, she was the perfect accessory. Beautiful, graceful, and most importantly, silent. She was the placid lake reflecting his towering ego. He had found her working as a translator at a conference in Geneva, her quiet intelligence a momentary amusement. He'd pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition, showering her with a lifestyle that would have made royalty blush. He gave her a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a wardrobe filled with haute couture, and a black Amex with no conceivable limit. In return, he expected only one thing, her utter and complete compliance. For 5 years, she had played her part flawlessly. Today was the final act. The divorce. It was in his mind a simple transaction, a severing of a tie that had served its purpose. He had already lined up her replacement, a fiery Brazilian model with a social media following that rivaled a small country's population. The prenuptial agreement, a document as thick as a phone book and ironclad in its cruelty, was his masterpiece. It would grant Isabella a one-time payment of $5 million. A fortune to most, but to a man of Julian's stature, it was less than a rounding error. It was a final dismissive flick of the wrist. He sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table in his lawyer's office, the skyline of Manhattan, a glittering testament to his power. Arthur Vance, his lead attorney, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold reptilian eyes, slid a pen across the table. "Everything is in order, Julian." Arthur said, his voice a low, confident purr. "She signs and you're free. Clean. The $5 million will be wired to her account within the hour." Julian leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips. "And the non-disclosure. It's airtight, I trust. As a submarine, my friend." She so much as whispers the name Croft in a negative light, and she'll be back to translating instruction manuals for a living. The mood was jovial, celebratory. The air crackled with the kind of masculine arrogance that thrives in rooms where fortunes are made and lives are casually dismantled. They were masters of the universe, and this was just another Tuesday. Julian glanced at his watch again. She was late. 10 minutes late. The disrespect of it pricked at his ego. He had demanded punctuality from everyone in his life, from his board members to his household staff. For Isabella, his soon-to-be ex-wife, to defy this simple expectation on this day of all days was an infuriating act of rebellion. "Where is she?" he snapped, his good humor evaporating. Arthur shrugged a gesture of practiced nonchalance. "Traffic, perhaps, or maybe she's having a moment. It's a lot for a woman like her to process." Leaving all this, he gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "She's not leaving it," Julian corrected him, his voice hard. "She's being removed from it. There's a difference." He stood and walked to the vast window, gazing down at the city below. He saw the ant-like people scurrying on the streets, the yellow cabs like tiny crawling insects. They were all part of his world, his kingdom. And Isabella. She was just one of them, a temporary resident in his elevated reality, now being sent back to the ground where she belonged. He thought of her pregnancy with a surge of irritation. It had been an unwelcome complication. Her tearful announcement 3 months ago had been met not with joy, but with cold fury. He had accused her of trapping him of a desperate last-ditch effort to secure her position. The timing was too convenient, too transparent. His response had been swift and brutal. He had moved her out of their shared bedroom that very night and instructed his lawyers to expedite the divorce proceedings. The child, he had decided, would be provided for, of course. A trust fund, the best schools, everything a Croft heir was entitled to. But the mother would be excised from the picture. He turned back to the room, his patience worn thin. "Get her on the phone, Arthur. Tell her I don't have all day." As Arthur reached for his phone, the double doors of the conference room swung open with a soft, expensive sigh. And there she was. The woman who stood in the doorway was Isabella, yet she was not. The change was so profound, so startling, that for a moment Julian felt a genuine sense of dislocation, as if he were looking at a stranger who bore a passing resemblance to his wife. The Isabella he knew would have entered such a room with her eyes downcast. Her shoulders slightly stooped as if apologizing for the space she occupied. She would have worn something soft and inoffensive, a cashmere sweater set in a muted tone of beige or dove grey. Her hair would have been pulled back in a simple, elegant chignon, her face a mask of quiet resignation. This woman was different. She wore a bespoke power suit of the deepest midnight blue, tailored to accommodate her subtle but visible baby bump. The cut was sharp, modern, and unapologetically expensive. Her hair, which she usually wore long and straight, was styled in soft, confident waves that framed a face he barely recognized. The makeup was minimal, but masterful, highlighting the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes and the resolute set of her jaw. She met his gaze directly without a flicker of fear or submission. It was a look of unnerving equality. But it was the object in her hand that truly sent a jolt through the room. It was not a designer handbag. It was a well-worn, dark brown leather briefcase, the kind favored by old-school lawyers and financiers. It was scuffed at the corners and bore the faint embossed initials E.C., Edward Croft, Julian's father. A stunned silence fell over the room. Arthur Vance, who had been halfway through dialing Isabella's number, slowly lowered his phone. His reptilian eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on alarm. Julian's other lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their confident smirks replaced by frowns of bewilderment. Isabella walked into the room with a calm, deliberate stride. Her heels made a soft, rhythmic clicking sound on the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo the sudden, frantic beating of Julian's heart. She didn't take the seat that had been designated for her at the far end of the table, the one that screamed visitor and outsider. Instead, She walked to the side of the table, placing the briefcase on the polished mahogany with a soft, definitive thud. "Julian." "Arthur," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the tremor of emotion he had expected. "My apologies for the delay. I was finalizing some necessary paperwork." Julian found his voice, though it came out harsher than he intended. "What is this, Isabella? What's with the costume? And what in God's name are you doing with my father's briefcase?" He hadn't seen that briefcase in years, not since the day his father had died, leaving him the keys to the kingdom. Isabella's lips curved into a smile, but it was not a smile he had ever seen before. It was cool, controlled, and held a hint of something he could only describe as pity. "This is no costume, Julian. As for the briefcase, I suppose you could call it my inheritance." Arthur Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Your inheritance, Mrs. Croft. With all due respect, the terms of the prenup are quite clear. You waived any and all claims to the Croft family estate. I waived my claims to Julian's estate," Isabella corrected him gently, her eyes still locked on her husband. "But I never waived my claims to Edward's." Julian felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a feeling so alien it was disorienting. He was Julian Croft. He didn't feel dread. He inspired it. "My father left everything to me," he said, the words a blunt instrument. It was his dying wish. The will was read, executed, and settled years ago. You were a stranger to him. "Were I?" Isabella replied, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. She reached for the clasps on the old briefcase. The metallic clicks sounded like gunshots in the silent room. "Your father and I had many conversations, Julian. In the last year of his life, when you were too busy closing deals and jet-setting to notice he was fading, he and I became close." She opened the briefcase. Inside, nestled against the aged satin lining, was a single thick envelope sealed with the familiar waxen crest of the Croft family. But the seal was not Julian's. It was his father's, and next to it lay another document, crisp and official, bearing the letterhead of the New York State Surrogates Court. "Your father was a brilliant man." Julian Isabella continued her gaze, now sweeping over the stunned faces of his legal team. He was also a deeply disappointed one. He saw the man you were becoming, the arrogance, the cruelty. He feared you would run his life's work into the ground, not through incompetence, but through sheer hubris. She slid the sealed envelope across the table towards Julian. Her movements were fluid, graceful, the movements of a woman completely in control. He didn't trust you to do the right thing, so he made a contingency plan, a final testament, one that would only be revealed under a very specific set of circumstances. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the suffocatingly quiet room. "The day you tried to cast aside his grandchild's mother, with nothing but pocket change." Julian stared at the envelope. His name was not on it. In his father's familiar, spidery handwriting were the words, "To be opened by Isabella Rossi Croft, on the day of her divorce from my son." Arthur Vance finally snapped out of his stupor. "This is preposterous, a theatrical stunt. Any subsequent will would have been invalidated by the one we filed. This is meaningless." "Is it, Arthur?" Isabella asked, her voice turning sharp as steel. She slid the second document towards the lawyer. "This is a court order filed this morning. It validates this will as the true and final testament of Edward Croft, citing compelling evidence of the original probate being filed under fraudulent pretenses." It seems my father's long-time personal attorney, a man far more loyal to him than to his son, kept this document safe for me. He was quite appalled to hear about the divorce and the circumstances surrounding it. She looked back at Julian, her eyes holding his captive. The demure, silent wife was gone, replaced by a queen who had just checkmated the king. "You see, Julian," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone that was more terrifying than any shout. "Your father didn't leave his company to you. He left it in trust, a trust that you would control so long as you remained a worthy steward of his legacy, a legacy of family honor and decency. The will contains a morality clause, a very, very specific one. And you, my dear husband, have just violated it in the most spectacular way possible." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian Croft, a man who had built his identity on the unshakable foundation of control, felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. The air in the room, once thick with his own self-importance, was now heavy with a silence that was both accusing and absolute. His lawyers, the so-called sharks, looked like beached fish, their mouths opening and closing with no sound emerging. Arthur Vance was the first to recover, snatching the court order from the table. His eyes, usually darting and assessing, were now wide, scanning the legal jargon with a frantic desperation. He paled. The document was authentic. The seal was unbroken. The judge's signature was one he recognized and feared. It was a legal masterstroke, a perfectly executed ambush. This is an outrage." Arthur sputtered, his voice cracking. "We will challenge this. This is undue influence." She manipulated a dying man. Isabella didn't even grace him with a glance. Her attention was fixed like a laser on Julian. Manipulated him. She repeated a sad, ironic laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, Arthur, you have no idea. Edward and I discussed everything. We talked about art, literature, politics. We talked about his childhood, the struggles he faced building his company from the ground up. And yes, we talked about Julian. A lot." She finally broke her gaze with her husband and turned to Arthur. "You will find," she said, her tone crisp and businesslike, "that my father-in-law, Edward Croft, made me a signatory on his personal accounts 6 months before he died. He also granted me a durable power of attorney. He was of sound mind, and his personal physicians and a court-appointed psychiatrist will all testify to that effect. He knew exactly what he was doing. Her words were precise, each one a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing the bloated balloon of their arrogance." Julian felt a wave of nausea. He remembered those last months. He'd been busy with the acquisition of a rival tech firm in Asia. He had visited his father, of course. Brief, perfunctory visits where he'd talk at the old man about his latest triumphs, barely registering the weary sadness in his father's eyes. He had seen Isabella there, reading to his father, or playing chess with him, and had dismissed it as her wifely duty, a way to make herself useful. He had never imagined this. "Open it," Julian Isabella commanded softly. His hands trembled as he reached for the thick, cream-colored envelope. The wax seal bearing his father's crest felt warm, almost alive. He broke it with a clumsy finger, his usual decisiveness gone. He pulled out a sheaf of heavy parchment covered in his father's elegant cursive script. He began to read, his eyes flying across the page. The document began with the standard legal formalities, but then it shifted into a deeply personal and utterly devastating letter. "My dearest Julian, if you are reading this, it means you have failed. You have failed me. You have failed the family name and you have failed the one person who showed you unwavering loyalty and kindness when you least deserved it. You have chosen the path of arrogance and cruelty, the very things I fought to overcome in my own life, the very things I prayed you would rise above. Julian's breath hitched. His father's voice, so long silenced by death, was speaking to him from the page, and it was a voice of profound, gut-wrenching disappointment. The will continued laying out the terms in excruciating detail. It spoke of the Croft Holdings empire not as a personal piggy bank, but as a legacy. It was a living entity, Edward wrote, built on the sweat and loyalty of thousands of employees. It was a responsibility, not a right. Then came the morality clause. It was brutal in its specificity. The control of my estate vested in the Julian Croft Trust. Julian read aloud, his voice a hoarse whisper, is contingent upon my son, upholding the values of family and honor upon which this company was built. Specifically, should Julian initiate a divorce from his wife, Isabella Rossi Croft, for any reason other than infidelity on her part, and should he fail to provide for her in a manner befitting her station and her contribution to his life, and most critically to the life of my grandchild, then the terms of this trust shall be immediately and irrevocably altered. Julian's eyes darted down the page, searching for a loophole, a way out. There was none. His father, the master strategist, had thought of everything. The will then laid out the consequences of his transgression. First, his position as CEO and chairman of Croft Holdings was to be terminated effective immediately. Second, his control over the Julian Croft Trust, the entity that held the vast majority of his shares and assets, was to be dissolved. Third, a new primary beneficiary of the Edward Croft estate was to be named. Julian's blood ran cold as he read the next paragraph. In the event of the aforementioned clause being triggered, I hereby bequeath 60% of the total shares of Croft Holdings to Isabella Rossi Croft in trust for my grandchild. This trust will be managed by her with full voting rights and executive authority until my grandchild reaches the age of 25. She will assume the role of chairwoman of the board, effective immediately. 60%. The number hung in the air, a monstrous, unbelievable figure. It was a controlling stake. It was the entire kingdom. He, Julian Croft, was being dethroned. But his father wasn't finished. The will was a work of posthumous vengeance, designed not just to disinherit him, but to utterly humiliate him. A further 20% of the shares the will continued shall be placed into an employee stock ownership plan to be distributed among all full-time employees who have served Croft Holdings for more than 5 years. It is they who are the true foundation of this company, and it is time their loyalty was rewarded. 20% to the employees, an act of corporate heresy in Julian's cutthroat world. And what of Julian himself? To my son Julian, the will concluded, I leave the remaining 20% of the shares. This will provide him with a comfortable income, provided he learns to live more modestly than he is accustomed. He will retain a seat on the board, but he will hold no executive power. It is my hope, my final dying hope, that from this diminished position, he might finally learn the lesson that eluded him in his wealth and power, that a man's worth is not measured by what he owns, but by how he treats those who have nothing to give him but their love. Julian dropped the papers onto the table as if they were on fire. He stared at Isabella, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. You, he seethed the word a venomous hiss. You did this, you snake. You gold-digging whore! You played us all!" Isabella did not flinch. She stood her ground, her expression a mixture of sorrow and steel. "No, Julian," she said quietly. "You did this to yourself. Your father gave you everything, and you valued none of it. He saw it. He knew it. And he loved you enough to try and save you from yourself, even from beyond the grave." She picked up the court order and placed it squarely in front of Arthur Vance. "The transfer of shares is already being processed. The board is being notified as we speak. I believe my first official act as chairwoman will be to call an emergency meeting for this afternoon." She looked at the assembled lawyers, her gaze sweeping over them with cool dismissal. "As for you gentlemen, your services to Croft Holdings are no longer required. You will be compensated for your time today, of course. From Julian's personal accounts, not the company's." She then turned her back on them all and walked towards the door, her composure absolute. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the handle, and looked back at her vanquished husband, a man who in the space of 10 minutes had gone from king to a mere court jester in his own empire. "Oh, and Julian," she added, her voice soft, but carrying the final devastating blow. "The penthouse, the cars, the jet, they were all purchased through the company, weren't they? I'll need the keys by the end of the day. I wouldn't want you to be accused of trespassing." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a silence so profound it was a scream, and a man who had just lost everything. The silence Isabella left in her wake was a living thing, a malevolent presence that pressed in on Julian from all sides. For a full minute he was frozen, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of denial and fury. The words on the page, his father's words, swirled before his eyes, mocking him. 60%. Chairwoman, you have failed. Then the dam of his composure broke. With a primal roar of rage, he swept his arm across the mahogany table. Pens, notepads, glasses of water, and the billion-dollar divorce settlement papers went flying, scattering across the floor like so much garbage. The sound of shattering glass echoed the shattering of his world. "No!" He screamed, his voice raw with disbelief. "This is not happening. This is a joke. A sick, twisted joke." Arthur Vance and his team flinched back, their faces pale. The sharks had lost their teeth. They were now just men in expensive suits, staring at a client who was imploding before their very eyes. "Julian." "Calm down," Arthur said, taking a hesitant step forward. "We need to think. There are legal avenues. We can file an injunction contest, the probate. Contest it with what Julian rounded on him." His eyes wild. "She has a court order. She has my father's doctors. She has his lawyer. He spent the last year of his life plotting my downfall with my own wife. The absurdity of it, the sheer theatrical betrayal, was what galled him the most. He had seen himself as the ultimate puppet master, yet all along he had been the puppet. His quiet, submissive wife and his dying, disappointed father had been pulling the strings. He sank into his chair, the rage momentarily replaced by a cold, hollowing despair. He stared at the damning will, his father's signature, a final condemning flourish. He began to remember. Fragments of memory, previously insignificant, now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He remembered Isabella, sitting by his father's bedside, not just reading novels, but reading aloud from the Wall Street Journal, discussing market trends and stock fluctuations. He had found it quaint, even amusing. "Look at my little wife playing businesswoman," he'd once joked to a friend. He remembered her asking him questions about the company's logistics division, about their supply chain vulnerabilities. He had been dismissive, patting her on the head and telling her not to worry her pretty little head about such complex matters. Now he realized she hadn't been making small talk. She had been conducting research. He remembered a heated argument with his father a few months before he died. Julian had wanted to sell off the company's oldest manufacturing plant, a legacy asset that was barely breaking even to fund a flashy new venture in cryptocurrency. His father had been furious. That plant was the cornerstone of this company. Edward had thundered, his voice weak, but his eyes blazing. It employs 300 people, Julian. People who have given their lives to this family. You don't just throw them away for a speculative gamble, Julian had scoffed. It's called progress, father. You're sentimental. You can't let emotion cloud business judgment. Emotion, his father had retorted, a look of profound sorrow on his face. What you call emotion, I call humanity. It's the thing you seem to have misplaced. At the time, Julian had dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man, out of touch with the modern world. Now he saw it for what it was, a final test. A test he had failed spectacularly. His phone began to buzz incessantly on the floor where it had fallen. Then Arthur's phone began to buzz, and then the phones of the other two lawyers. The news was breaking. The notifications would be flooding in from Bloomberg, from the Financial Times, from every major news outlet. Shake-up at Croft Holdings. Julian Croft ousted as CEO. Mysterious heir takes control. His life wasn't just falling apart. It was being publicly dissected. The humiliation was a physical pain, a fire in his gut. He looked at Arthur, a new desperate hope flickering in his eyes. The prenup. What about the prenup? She signed it. She waived her rights. Arthur Vance shook his head, slowly, his face grim. The prenup is irrelevant, Julian. This isn't about a division of marital assets. This is about an inheritance, a direct bequest from your father. The prenup protects your assets from her. It doesn't protect you from your own father's will. The logic was simple, brutal, and inescapable. The door to the conference room opened again. This time it wasn't Isabella. It was a woman Julian recognized, Maria, his father's personal assistant, for over 40 years. A quiet, unassuming woman he had always treated as part of the furniture. She was holding an iPad. She didn't look at Julian. She addressed the room. "Excuse me. Ms. Croft has called an emergency board meeting for 2:30 p.m. via Zoom. The link has just been sent out. Ms. Croft." Not Mrs. Croft. The distinction was a small, sharp stab to his ego. Then Maria's gaze finally settled on Julian, and for the first time in all the years he had known her, he saw not deference, but a cool, undisguised contempt. "Mr. Edward," she said, her voice trembling slightly with an emotion he now recognized as righteous. Anger. "Loved you very much, Julian. He worried about you every day. He saw the good man you could have been, and he saw the man you chose to be." She placed a small, simple object on the table next to the will. It was an old silver locket. "Isabella gave this to him," Maria said. "It has a picture of her ultrasound inside. He carried it with him every day until he died. He called the baby his little hope. He said this child, his grandchild, was the future of the Croft legacy, a future he had to protect. From you." With that final, devastating pronouncement, she turned and walked out, leaving Julian staring at the locket, the last piece of the puzzle, the final confirmation of the depth of his blindness. He had been so consumed with his own power, so certain of his own brilliance, that he had never truly seen the people around him. He had not seen the intelligence and strength in his wife, the profound disappointment in his father, or the quiet loyalty of those who had served his family for decades. He had seen only reflections of himself, extensions of his will. And in his arrogance, he had provided them with the very weapon they needed to bring him down. The ultimate irony was not lost on him. In trying to secure his absolute freedom, he had orchestrated his own imprisonment. He was trapped not by walls or bars, but by his own name, his own legacy now wielded by the woman he had tried to discard. The king was not just checkmated. He had been comprehensively and utterly erased from the board. While Julian was descending into his personal hell, Isabella was ascending. She returned not to the cold, opulent penthouse that had been her gilded cage, but to a place she hadn't entered in 5 years, the original Croft family mansion on the Upper East Side. It was a stately limestone monolith, a relic of old New York money and power. Julian had always found it stuffy and outdated, preferring the sleek, modern anonymity of his glass tower in the sky. But for Edward, and now for Isabella, it was the heart of the empire. The staff, many of whom had served the family since before Julian was born, greeted her not with surprise, but with quiet, respectful deference. They had been informed. Maria, ever efficient, had made the calls. "Welcome home, Opamisul," Croft said, the elderly butler, his eyes shining with unshed tears of loyalty. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied, her voice warm. "It's good to be back." She didn't pause or hesitate. She walked with purpose through the grand foyer, past the portraits of stern-faced Croft ancestors, and went straight to the one room Julian had never willingly entered his father's study. It was a sanctuary of dark wood, worn leather, and the smell of old books and pipe tobacco. Nothing had been changed since Edward's death. His reading glasses still lay on a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. His favorite chess set, a beautiful ivory creation, was still set up on a side table, a game unfinished. Isabella ran her hand over the back of his large leather chair. This was where the plan had been born. In this room, during long afternoons and quiet evenings, a dying patriarch and his underestimated daughter-in-law had forged an alliance. He had seen past the quiet facade to the sharp, strategic mind beneath. He had been a lonely man, watching his son become a caricature of everything he despised. In Isabella he had found a kindred spirit, a worthy successor, who understood that true power was not about domination, but about responsibility. He had mentored her, taught her the intricacies of the business, the histories of every division, the strengths and weaknesses of every executive. He had given her the education that Julian in his arrogance had denied her, and she had been a brilliant student. Now it was time for her first lesson as chairwoman. At exactly 200 p.m., she sat behind her father-in-law's immense mahogany desk, the very seat of his power, and opened her laptop to join the emergency board meeting. One by one, the faces of the board members appeared on the screen. They were a gallery of the rich and powerful titans of industry, grizzled financiers, and influential socialites. Their expressions ranged from utter bewilderment to thinly veiled hostility. They were Julian's people, his allies, his enablers. And then one final window opened. It was Julian. His face was puffy, his eyes red-rimmed. He was sitting in the soulless conference room, a ghost at his own funeral. He had a seat on the board, his father's final cruel mercy. But he was now just one face among many, and the smallest one at that, holding only a minority stake. Isabella took a deep, steadying breath and began. Good afternoon, everyone, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Isabella Rossi Croft. As per the final and binding will of the late Edward Croft, which has been legally validated and executed this morning, I have assumed the role of chairwoman of the board of Croft Holdings, effective immediately. A wave of stunned silence and frantic private messages between board members rippled across the Zoom call. I know this is unexpected, she continued, and I understand you will have many questions. Rest assured, transparency will be a cornerstone of my leadership. However, our first order of business is to stabilize the company and reassure our investors and employees. To that end, I am announcing some immediate changes. She laid out her vision with a clarity and confidence that stunned them into submission. She wasn't tearing the company down. She was rebuilding it from the foundations up, according to her and Edward's shared vision. First, she announced the immediate reversal of Julian's plan to sell the old manufacturing plant. The Croft legacy was built on making things, not just on making money. She stated, echoing Edward's words, "We will invest in that plant, modernize it, and make it a model of 21st century manufacturing. The employees who have given us their loyalty deserve nothing less." Second, she addressed the 20% employee stock ownership plan. Our greatest asset is our people. I am appointing a committee led by employees themselves to oversee the fair and equitable distribution of these shares. From this day forward, every employee will have a tangible stake in our shared success. Third, she announced a comprehensive review of all executive compensation packages, including her own. The era of rewarding greed is over. From now on, compensation will be tied not just to profits, but to ethical conduct, employee satisfaction, and our company's contribution to the community. Julian could only watch impotent as the empire he had treated as his personal playground was systematically reshaped into something he barely recognized. Every word she spoke was a repudiation of his entire philosophy, his very being. It was a public vivisection of his reign. One of the older board members, a long-time crony of Julian's, finally found his voice. "With all due respect, Miss Croft, you have no experience running a company of this magnitude. This is idealistic. It's not how the real world works." Isabella met his gaze through the screen, her expression unyielding. "You are mistaken, Mr. Henderson. I have had the finest mentor one could ask for the man who built this company. And as for my experience, you are correct that I have not been a CEO before. That is why my first act as chairwoman is to appoint a new one." A collective gasp went through the virtual room. "I am promoting Sarah Jenkins, the current Chief Operating Officer, to the position of Chief Executive Officer," Isabella announced. This was a masterstroke. Sarah Jenkins was a brilliant, universally respected executive who had risen through the ranks on sheer talent. She was also a woman Julian had consistently overlooked and undermined, threatened by her competence. By promoting her, Isabella was not only installing a capable leader, but also signaling a complete break from the toxic, misogynistic culture of the old guard. Sarah will handle the day-to-day operations, Isabella concluded. As chairwoman, my focus will be on long-term strategy, ethical governance, and ensuring that Croft Holdings once again becomes a name synonymous not just with wealth, but with honor. Are there any further questions? There were none. They were utterly routed. They saw in her not the timid wife of a billionaire, but the true heir of Edward Croft, a leader with a will of iron and a vision that was both radical and deeply rooted in the company's own history. As she ended the call, Isabella allowed herself a small, weary smile. The first battle was won. She leaned back in her father-in-law's chair, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. This was for him, for her child, and for the future he had entrusted to her. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Julian's name was scrubbed from the company website. His corporate accounts were frozen. His company credit cards were cancelled mid-charge at a 5-star restaurant where he was drowning his sorrows. The eviction notice for the penthouse was delivered by a stony-faced courier. He was forced to move his belongings into a suite at the Four Seasons, a luxury that for the first time he had to pay for himself. His 20% stake would still make him a rich man, but he had lost the one thing he truly cared about: his power. He was no longer the king. He was just another wealthy spectator. That evening, as Isabella walked through the quiet halls of the mansion, she paused at the chess table. She studied the half-finished game, recognizing the positions. It was a game she had been playing with Edward. He had been teaching her, using the pieces to illustrate strategies of foresight, sacrifice, and control. She looked at the board and saw it clearly. Edward had deliberately left his king in a vulnerable position, sacrificing it to allow his queen to sweep across the board and dominate. It was his final lesson. With a steady hand, Isabella picked up her ivory queen. She moved it across the board in a single decisive move. "Checkmate," she whispered into the silent room. For 3 months, Isabella's reign was a whirlwind of transformative action. Guided by her CEO, Sarah Jenkins Croft, Holdings underwent a radical metamorphosis. The stock price, after an initial wobble, stabilized and then began to climb as investors, weary of Julian's erratic, ego-driven leadership, responded to the new era of stability and ethical purpose. The employee stock plan was a massive success, boosting morale and productivity to unprecedented levels. Isabella was hailed in the press as a visionary, a refreshing new face in the staid world of corporate governance. She was the woman who had tamed the beast, not by killing it, but by reminding it of its soul. Julian, meanwhile, festered. From his gilded cage at the Four Seasons, he watched her every move with a venomous obsession. He was a pariah. His old friends, the ones who had laughed at his jokes and drunk his vintage champagne, now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a cautionary tale whispered about at exclusive country clubs and charity galas. He had become a ghost in the machine he had once commanded. His days were a monotonous cycle of bitterness. He would wake late, read the fawning articles about Isabella's leadership, and then call his new, less prestigious lawyers to explore legal challenges that grew more futile by the day. They had filed appeals motions and injunctions. All were summarily dismissed. The will was ironclad. Edward Croft, with Isabella's help, had constructed a legal fortress. But Julian was not a man to accept defeat. If the law wouldn't work, he would find another way. He began to dig. He hired private investigators, forensic accountants, anything to find a crack in Isabella's armor. He was convinced she had a secret, a weakness he could exploit to bring her down and reclaim his throne. He spent millions of his dwindling personal fortune searching for a skeleton in her closet. And then he found one. It came from an anonymous tip emailed to his lawyer from an encrypted server. The email was short and cryptic. Ask about the Geneva conference, the one before she met you. Ask about a man named Alexei Volkov. The name meant nothing to Julian, but the hunt was on. His investigators dug deep into Isabella's past, a past he had never bothered to learn about. They discovered that a year before he had met her, Isabella had worked as a translator for a highly sensitive negotiation in Geneva between a Swiss technology firm and a shadowy Russian conglomerate headed by a man named Alexei Volkov. Volkov was a notorious oligarch, a man with deep ties to the Kremlin and a reputation for ruthless business practices that often blurred the line into criminality. The deal had fallen through at the last minute. The Swiss company had pulled out citing irreconcilable ethical concerns, shortly after their proprietary source code for a revolutionary new AI platform had been stolen. The theft was never solved, but whispers had always pointed to Volkov's organization. Julian's heart pounded as he read the report. This was it. This was the leverage he needed. Isabella was at the center of a major corporate espionage case. If he could prove she was involved, that she had been Volkov's inside woman, he could destroy her. He could paint her as a corporate spy, a fraud, a criminal. The board, the investors, the public, they would all turn on her. The morality clause in his father's will was about family and honor. What was more dishonorable than this? He decided to make his move not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. He leaked the story carefully curated and dripping with insinuation to a notoriously aggressive financial journalist known for his sensationalist takedowns. The headline exploded across the internet. Croft Holdings chairwoman linked to Russian oligarch in decade-old espionage scandal. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The company's stock plummeted. The board was in a panic. The carefully constructed image of Saint Isabella, the corporate savior, was shattered overnight. The ghost was back in the machine, and he was a virus. An emergency board meeting was called, but this time the atmosphere was different. The deference was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Julian joined the call from his lawyer's office, a triumphant smirk on his face for the first time in months. He was no longer the pathetic ghost. He was the avenging angel, Isabella. One of the board members said, his voice grave, "You need to address these allegations. Is there any truth to them? Did you work for Alexei Volkov?" All eyes were on Isabella. She sat in her father-in-law's study, her face pale, but her expression composed. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, and she rested a protective hand on her belly as if drawing strength from the life within. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was the lead translator on that project, a collective intake of breath." Julian's smirk widened. He had her. And did you know, Julian interjected, his voice dripping with false concern, that the Swiss company's most valuable intellectual property was stolen shortly after those negotiations collapsed, a theft that has been linked to this Alexei Volkov. "Yes," Isabella said again, her eyes finding his on the screen. "I am aware of that. And what would you say," Julian pressed, going in for the kill, "if I told you we have evidence suggesting that you were the one who facilitated that theft? That you were Volkov's mole?" He was bluffing about the evidence, but it didn't matter. The accusation was enough. He watched her, waiting for her to crumble, to deny, to lie. But Isabella did none of those things. Instead, a strange soul smile touched her lips. "I would say you are as usual half right and completely wrong, Julian," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "I did not facilitate the theft. I prevented it." She looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. "The Swiss company Kalis Technologies hired me as a translator. But I soon realized that Volkov was not interested in a partnership. He was using the negotiations as a cover to plant a mole and steal their AI code. I discovered who the mole was, one of their own senior engineers, who was in debt to Volkov. I gathered the evidence. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. But I was in a difficult position. I was a 24-year-old translator. Who would believe me over a senior engineer? So I went not to the Swiss authorities, but to someone I knew had the power and the discretion to handle it. Someone with a vested interest in stopping a man like Volkov. Julian's triumphant smile began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. He didn't like where this was going. Isabella continued. I went to the head of a rival company, a man who also happened to be the patriarch of a powerful American family, a man who was known for his integrity and his deep distrust of men like Volkov. He met with me secretly in Geneva. He reviewed my evidence, and he believed me. He used his influence to quietly warn the CEO of Kalis Technologies, allowing them to pull out of the deal and neutralize the mole without a public scandal that would have destroyed their reputation. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze piercing and resolute. That man, she said, her voice ringing with clarity, was your father. Edward Croft. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. Edward and I didn't meet for the first time. When you brought me to New York. Julian. Isabella revealed, her voice softening. We had already known each other for a year. It was your father who, impressed with my actions in Geneva, encouraged me to move to the United States. It was your father who subtly orchestrated the circumstances under which you and I would meet. He had hoped that a woman who shared his values might be a good influence on you. She gave a small, sorrowful shake of her head. It seems he miscalculated on that point. But he never forgot what I did. He saw me as a protector of his own values, long before I ever became the part of his family. The entire story is documented in his personal journals. The one sitting right here in his desk. She held up a leather-bound journal. He called the file The Geneva Gambit, she said. Your investigators, Julian, are good at digging up dirt, but they, like you, only ever look for the worst in people. They never thought to look for the truth. Julian was speechless. He had walked directly into a trap more complex and more deeply laid than he could ever have imagined. He had thought he was a ghost haunting the machine, but he was just a pawn in a game that had started long before he even knew it was being played. He had tried to expose a skeleton in Isabella's closet, only to find it was the very foundation upon which her kingdom was built. He hadn't just lost his company. He had lost the entire narrative, the very history he thought was his. In his desperate attempt to reclaim his past, he had only succeeded in cementing his own irrelevance for good. So the king was finally and utterly defeated, not by a hostile takeover or a market crash, but by the quiet, strategic brilliance of the queen he had so arrogantly underestimated. Julian Croft learned the hard way that a legacy is not just built on stock prices and acquisitions, but on character honor and the secrets you keep. Isabella, with her unborn child, the true Croft heir, proved that real power isn't seized, it's earned through integrity and a will of iron. She didn't just take his company, she reclaimed its soul. What do you think? Was this a story of sweet revenge, or a lesson in the ultimate cost of pride? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this tale of drama and twisted fate, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe for more tales of fortune folly and the powerful secrets that can change everything in an instant. The notification that shattered Kate's world wasn't a text message or a missed call. It was a single glistening photo on a social media app. There he was, her husband, Luca, the man who'd kissed her pregnant belly just that morning, his hand now wrapped around the waist of a woman whose face was adored by millions. He'd left her for an influencer, but what he and his new muse didn't know, as they curated their perfect life on the world's hottest new app, was that the woman they'd discarded was about to become the one who owned their entire reality. This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when a woman's pain is forged into power. The silence in their San Francisco apartment was the first thing that felt wrong. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a hollow and echoing void where the comfortable hum of a shared life used to be. Kate, 7 months pregnant and feeling every bit of it, lowered herself onto the plush grey sofa, her hand instinctively resting on the taut drum of her stomach. Luca was on a business trip, a last-minute all-important conference in Miami for the design firm he worked for. He'd been so apologetic, so full of promises to make it up to her, his kisses feeling urgent and distracted. Kate and Luca had been the picture of modern success. She was a brilliant data analyst for a major tech firm. Before going on early maternity leave, a woman who saw the world in patterns and probabilities. He was the charming, handsome graphic designer, the dreamer to her pragmatist. They'd met at a cafe, a classic story of him sketching her on a napkin. Their love felt like a perfectly designed user experience, intuitive, beautiful, and seamless, until it wasn't. The past 6 months, something had shifted. Luca had become obsessed with a new social media platform called Aura. It was more than just filters. Aura used a sophisticated AI to create entire lifestyle templates. Users could upload a simple photo, and the app would transform it into a scene of impossible glamour. A dreary Tuesday morning could look like a sun-drenched brunch in Santorini. A selfie in a drab apartment could become a candid laugh in a Parisian loft. It was the ultimate engine of curated fantasy, and its biggest star was an influencer named Chloe Vance. Chloe was Aura's queen. With 15 million followers, her life was a cascade of perfect moments, each one processed through Aura's signature glow. She was perpetually on vacation, perpetually draped in designer clothes, perpetually in love with the camera. Luca was mesmerized. At first it was professional admiration. "Look at her branding aims," he'd say, scrolling endlessly through her feed. "She's not just a person. She's a product. It's genius." Soon his admiration soured into a strange, distant longing. He started using Aura for his own design portfolio, trying to capture that same elusive gloss. He was on his phone constantly, his thumb stroking the screen, as if trying to absorb Chloe's life through the glass. When Kate would gently ask him to be present, he'd snap, "This is my work, Kate. It's about staying relevant." The business trip to Miami was the culmination of this growing distance. He'd packed in a hurry, his movements jerky and avoidant. Now the silence he'd left behind felt heavy with unspoken words. Kate tried to busy herself folding and refolding tiny onesies in the nursery, the scent of fresh paint and new furniture doing little to soothe her unease. The crib, a sleek Scandinavian design Luca had insisted on, stood half-assembled in the corner, a monument to his unfinished promises. That evening, seeking a mindless distraction, she opened Instagram. It was a mistake. Her feed, usually a mix of friends' babies and home decor, was now dominated by Chloe Vance. Luca, in his obsession, had engaged with so much of her content that the algorithm had decided Kate must be a fan too. She was about to scroll past when a new post from Chloe, uploaded just 1 hour ago, froze the blood in her veins. It was a picture, but it was rendered through Aura to look like a still from a romantic film. Chloe Vance, stunning in a white linen dress, was laughing, her head thrown back. Her arm was linked with a man whose back was mostly to the camera, but Kate didn't need to see his face. She knew the line of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, the familiar grey t-shirt she had bought him. They were standing on a balcony overlooking the ocean, the sunset casting them in hues of orange and pink. The location tag was simple: South Beach, Miami. The caption, however, was the killing blow. Sometimes you have to break the rules to find your true north. So grateful for this unexpected chapter. But it wasn't the caption that made Kate drop her phone. It was the top comment liked by thousands from a verified account. Luca's account. It read, "My true north is you." The world didn't shatter. It simply dissolved. The walls of the apartment seemed to melt away. The floor fell from beneath her, and the only thing holding her together was the child kicking insistently in her womb. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It was a physical pain, a crushing weight on her chest that felt like a heart attack. She was a data analyst. She dealt in facts, in verifiable truths. This was a data point for which she had no model. She picked up her phone with a trembling hand. She clicked on Luca's profile. He had posted a new picture too, also through Aura. It was him smiling with the same ocean background. The caption, "Starting over." He had untagged himself from all of their old photos together. Years of their life, their wedding, their travels, their pregnancy announcement, all gone. In their place was this single glossy image of his new beginning. She dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. His familiar, cheerful voice filled the silent apartment. "Hey, you've reached Luca. Leave a message." She didn't leave one. She sent a text, her fingers clumsy and numb. "Miami." The reply came back almost instantly, a single cowardly sentence that bifurcated her life into a before and an after. "I'm sorry, Kate. I'm in love with her. I'm not coming home." There was no explanation, no phone call, just a text message as impersonal as a shipping notification. The man she had built a life with, the man who was the father of her unborn child, had erased her for a woman he knew only through a screen. The next few days were a blur of unimaginable pain. She called his parents, who were horrified, but unsurprised. "He's always been chasing something." "Kate," his mother had wept over the phone, "we just never thought he'd do this to you." His friends stopped answering her calls, clearly having chosen a side. The half-assembled crib became an object of torment. Every corner of the apartment held a ghost. A week later, a sterile, legal-looking envelope arrived. Inside were divorce papers already signed by Luca, delivered by a courier. He was waiving his rights to the apartment, which was in her name, and making a single insulting offer of a lump sum payment. It was a clean break. A transaction. He was closing a business deal, not ending a marriage. The true torture, however, was Aura. She couldn't look away. It was a form of self-flagellation. Every day, Luca and Chloe posted their new life. They called themselves #Lio. They documented everything through the app's romanticized lens: their first brunch, as an official couple holding hands on the beach, Luca surprising Chloe with a puppy. It was a fire hose of manufactured bliss, and the world was drinking it in. Their follower counts exploded. They were the internet's new favorite couple, praised for their bravery and authenticity. Comments poured in by the thousands. So happy you found real love. You two are glowing. Forget the haters, live your truth. Kate was the hater. The forgotten, pregnant, inconvenient truth. She read articles about them in online celebrity magazines. One headline read, "The Knew It Couple, How Luca Reynolds Left a Toxic Situation to Find True Love with Chloe Vance." Toxic. The word was a knife. In an interview, Chloe spoke vaguely about Luca's past. He was in a relationship that was holding him back creatively and emotionally, she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. He needed to be with someone who understood the pressures of living a public life, someone who was on his level. It was a hard decision, but it was for his own well-being. Luca, in the same article, was quoted as saying, "I realized I was living a life based on someone else's expectations. I was suffocating. Chloe, she sees me. The real me." Kate looked down at her swollen belly, at the stretch marks, mapping her skin at the life she was growing inside her. The life he had co-created and then abandoned. He wasn't suffocating. He was a coward who had mistaken the validation of strangers for love and the glow of an AI filter for happiness. It was during one of these late-night doom-scrolling sessions, tears streaming down her face as she looked at a picture of Luca and Chloe kissing in front of the Eiffel Tower, a trip she and Luca had been planning for their baby moon, that something inside her finally snapped. The grief, the humiliation, the incandescent rage, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of clarity. He thought he had seen the real her. He hadn't. He had only seen the wife, the partner, the accommodating other half. He had never seen the woman who had put herself through grad school, the analyst who could find the narrative in a sea of chaotic data, the survivor who had pulled herself out of poverty after her parents' death. He had left her for a fantasy. A beautiful, shallow, AI-generated fantasy. And the entire world was cheering them on, all because of an app. The app. Aura. Kate wiped her tears. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, balled into a fist. They had used Aura to build their perfect world on the ashes of hers. They thought they were the stars of the show. An idea cold and brilliant and terrifying began to form in the analytical part of her brain, the part that saw patterns, the part that understood systems. An idea that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with power. She wouldn't just delete the app. She wouldn't just block them. That was their game, their world. She was going to change the world itself. She was going to buy it. The decision, once it crystallized, was like a splash of ice water. The fog of grief began to recede, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp focus. For weeks, Kate had been a passenger in her own life, carried along by tides of sorrow and betrayal. Now she was grabbing the wheel. But the thought was on its face insane. Buy Aura. The app was a cultural phenomenon. It was likely worth hundreds of millions, if not billions. She was a single, unemployed mother-to-be living off savings. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh, a raw, humorless sound that startled her in the quiet apartment. But the thought wouldn't leave. It burrowed into her mind and set up camp. It was the only thing that felt like a path forward, a way to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from her. Her first move was practical. She scheduled an emergency appointment with her obstetrician. If she was going to declare war, she needed to know her own supply lines were secure. The baby had to be okay. In the sterile examination room, the cool gel on her belly, she held her breath. Then the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a tiny, ferocious heartbeat filled the room. Strong, steady, 150 beats per minute. "Everything looks perfect, Kate," her doctor. A kind woman named Dr. Chen said with a warm smile, "This little one is a fighter." Lying there, listening to the sound of her child's heart, Kate made a silent promise. "I will fight for you. I will not let you be born into a story where your mother was a victim." That resolve carried her home. She sat at her sleek iMac, the one Luca had always complained was too corporate for their apartment, and began to work. Her fingers, which had grown clumsy with grief, now flew across the keyboard with their old confidence. She wasn't just a heartbroken ex-wife anymore. She was Kate Reed, data analyst, and she was going to do what she did best: research. She started not with Aura, but with her own finances. She pulled up her accounts, her savings, her 401k. It was a respectable amount, enough to live on for a year or two, if she was careful, but not nearly enough to buy a lemonade stand, let alone a tech giant. The reality of her situation was stark. The plan was impossible. Defeated, she opened the digital folder labeled Personal Documents. It was a morbidly organized collection of her life, her birth certificate, her degree, her marriage license, now a worthless piece of paper. And in a subfolder titled Eleanor, there was her grandmother's will. Eleanor Reed had been the true north of Kate's life. A whip-smart, no-nonsense woman who had raised Kate after her parents died in a car crash when she was 10. Eleanor wasn't a woman of great wealth, but she was savvy. A high school math teacher, she had a preternatural gift for understanding the stock market. "It's just patterns, sweetheart," she'd say. "Human fear and human greed written in numbers." When Eleanor passed away 2 years ago, she had left Kate her house, which Kate had sold to buy the San Francisco apartment, and her stock portfolio. The portfolio was managed by a boutique firm in Boston, and Eleanor had left strict instructions in her will. "To my dearest Kate," the letter read, "this is not for frivolity. This is for a foundation. For a moment, when you need to build something for yourself on your own terms. Do not touch it until you know with every fiber of your being that the time is right." Kate had respected her grandmother's wishes. She'd glanced at the portfolio statements when they arrived, saw that it was mostly invested in a single obscure tech company called Althea Innovations, and filed them away. It was her nest egg for a distant hypothetical future. With a sense of dread and curiosity, she logged into the portfolio management portal for the first time. She braced herself for a modest sum, maybe $100,000 if she was lucky. The number that loaded on the screen made her gasp. $14,732,841.9. She stared, blinking. It had to be a mistake, a glitch, a typo. She refreshed the page. The number remained fluctuating by a few dollars as the market ticked. She quickly searched for Althea Innovations. The company wasn't obscure anymore. Althea specialized in AI-driven data processing and machine learning algorithms. 6 months ago, they had signed a massive exclusive contract with the Department of Defense, and their stock had skyrocketed by over 2,000%. Eleanor Reed, the quiet math teacher, had seen a pattern no one else did. She had invested her life savings into a small company she believed in, and her bet had paid off on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. Kate felt a wave of dizziness. $14 million. It was a life-altering, world-bending amount of money. Her grandmother's legacy wasn't just a safety net. It was a catapult. The impossible, insane idea of buying Aura suddenly felt plausible. Her research shifted gears. Now, with the specter of capital behind her, she wasn't just fantasizing. She was conducting due diligence. She dove into Aura. Not the front-end consumer-facing app, but the business behind it. The parent company was called Elysian Labs, Inc. It was founded 2 years ago by a trio of Stanford graduates. They had created the brilliant core technology, the AI, that made Aura so addictive. She spent days digging using her analyst skills to scrape public records, tech journals, and financial news archives. She found interviews with the founders where they boasted about user growth and engagement metrics. But Kate knew that vanity metrics often hid ugly truths. She looked deeper, searching for financial statements, for SEC filings, for any hint of their actual business health. What she found was a classic Silicon Valley story. Elysian Labs had a revolutionary product, but zero business acumen. They had burned through their seed funding and Series A funding at an alarming rate, spending lavishly on marketing and perks to attract talent. They had prioritized growth over profit, assuming they could secure a massive Series B round of funding to keep the lights on. But the tech market had cooled in the last quarter. Investors were getting skittish, demanding clear paths to profitability. According to an article in a niche tech business journal, Elysian Labs' proposed Series B funding round had just fallen through. The investors had backed out, citing concerns about the company's high burn rate and lack of a sustainable revenue model beyond the vague promise of future ad sales. Elysian Labs was bleeding money. They were a rocket ship that was running out of fuel, hurtling towards a crash. To the public, Toluca and Chloe Aura was a glittering success. But Kate, looking at the data, saw the truth. Aura was a damsel in distress, desperately in need of a savior. This was her opening. She picked up the phone and called the number on her grandmother's portfolio statement. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Thorne and Associates, Marcus Thorne speaking." "Mr. Thorne," Kate said, her own voice steady and clear, a stark contrast to the trembling woman she had been a week ago. "My name is Kate Reed. I'm Eleanor Reed's granddaughter. I believe you manage her portfolio." "Kate, of course. My deepest condolences again on your grandmother's passing. She was a remarkable woman," Marcus said warmly. "I was wondering when I might hear from you. That Althea stock has done... well, it's done wonders." "Yes," Kate said, cutting to the chase. "It has, and I want to liquidate a significant portion of it. I have an acquisition target in mind." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "An acquisition target?" Marcus sounded intrigued. His professional curiosity piqued. "This is unexpected. May I ask what company you're looking at?" Kate took a deep breath. "Elysian Labs, the company that owns the app Aura." The silence on the other end was longer this time. Kate could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the surprise, the calculation, the assessment of her sanity. "Well," Marcus finally said, a new note of respect in his voice. "That is a bold move, Miss Reed. A very bold move indeed. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Kate laid out her research. She talked about Elysian's burn rate, their failed funding round, their brilliant but mismanaged technology. She spoke not with emotion, but with the cold, hard logic of a seasoned analyst. She wasn't a woman scorned. She was an investor who had identified an undervalued asset with immense potential. Marcus was impressed. "Your grandmother was a shrewd woman," he said. "It appears she passed that trait on to you. An all-cash offer to a company in their position would be incredibly tempting. They'd be able to pay off their debts, their initial investors would get a decent exit, and the founders would walk away with millions. It's a golden parachute when they're about to crash into the mountain." "Exactly," Kate said. "But it has to be completely anonymous. They cannot know who the buyer is. My name cannot appear anywhere." "That's standard practice for a hostile-style takeover, even a friendly one. We'll set up a shell corporation, a holding company. It will be completely firewalled. They will have no idea who is writing the check," Marcus assured her. "Kate, this is a predator's move. Are you ready for that?" Kate looked at the half-assembled crib in the corner of the room. She thought of Luca's comment on Chloe's photo. "My true north is you." She thought of the life growing inside her, the tiny, resilient heartbeat. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice like steel, "I have never been more ready in my life." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Under the expert guidance of Marcus Thorne, Kate transformed from a private citizen into a silent, formidable corporate raider. Marcus, a seasoned veteran of Boston's cutthroat financial world, was invigorated by the challenge. He saw in Kate a reflection of her grandmother's quiet tenacity, and it was his honor to be her field marshal. They established a holding company, a deliberately nondescript entity named North Star Holdings, LLC. The irony was a private, bitter joke for Kate. Luca had found his true north in a fleeting fantasy. She would build an empire under hers. Marcus and his legal team handled the paperwork, creating a labyrinthine structure of ownership that made the ultimate beneficiary, Kate, utterly untraceable. While the lawyers built the fortress, Kate worked tirelessly from her apartment, which she now referred to as her war room. The nursery door was closed. The baby clothes were put away. Her focus was absolute. She and Marcus's team of analysts conducted a deep-dive valuation of Elysian Labs. They built financial models, projected user decline scenarios, and calculated the precise amount of debt the company was carrying. They discovered the situation was even more precarious than the news articles suggested. Elysian Labs had taken out a high-interest bridge loan to cover payroll just last month. They had 30 days to repay it, or they would be in default, which would trigger a cascade of legal and financial calamities. They were not just running out of fuel. The engines were on fire. "They're desperate," Marcus said during one of their daily calls. "Their backs are against the wall. The founders are probably at each other's throats, and their investors are screaming for their money back. This is the perfect time to strike." The strategy was simple and brutal, an all-cash offer that was just high enough to be an irresistible lifeline. It wasn't a generous offer that reflected Aura's cultural cachet, but a predator's price that reflected its dire financial reality. They would offer $35 million. $20 million would go to paying off their debts and early-stage investors, Marcus explained. The remaining $15 million would be split between the 3 founders, $5 million each, for a 30-year-old that's walk away and never work again money. It's an offer they can't refuse. Kate felt a pang of something complex, not guilt, but a heavy sense of consequence. She was about to irrevocably change the lives of dozens of employees of 3 young founders who had, despite their flaws, created something remarkable. But then she'd open Aura. She had to for market research, and she'd see them. Leo. Thriving. They were in Bali now. A post showed them on a swing overlooking a lush jungle, their bodies tanned, their smiles blinding. Luca had his hand on Chloe's flat stomach. The caption read, "Building our future one perfect moment at a time." The post had 2 million likes. Any flicker of doubt, Kate felt, was instantly extinguished by a wildfire of resolve. They were building their future on the wreckage of hers. The $35 million offer was not an act of aggression. It was an act of cosmic rebalancing. Through Marcus North Star, Holdings made its formal unsolicited offer to the board of Elysian Labs. The reaction was instantaneous. For 3 days, there was radio silence. Kate imagined the frantic meetings, the shouting matches, the sleepless nights for Elysian's CEO, a young man named Kevin Lynn. She could picture him staring at the offer on his screen, a deal from a ghost company that would solve all his problems, but would mean giving up his creation. On the 4th day, Marcus called. "They've blinked," he said, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. "They've hired an investment bank to represent them. They're ready to negotiate. Kevin Lynn is demanding to know who North Star Holdings is." "And what did you tell them?" Kate asked, her heart pounding. "I told them North Star is a private family fund with a deep interest in emerging AI technology, and that the principal values privacy above all else. I told them any attempt to uncover the owner's identity would result in the immediate withdrawal of the offer. They can have the money, or they can have their curiosity, not both." The negotiation was a swift and brutal affair, handled entirely by Marcus. Elysian Labs countered with $50 million. Marcus, on Kate's instruction, didn't budge. He simply resent the original offer with a note, "This offer is final and expires in 48 hours. It was a high-stakes game of chicken. Kate didn't sleep for those 2 days. She paced her apartment, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her agitation. This was it, the moment of truth. Was her analysis correct? Was their desperation greater than their pride? With 3 hours to go before the deadline, the acceptance came through. They had folded. Elysian Labs, the parent company of the cultural sensation Aura, had agreed to be acquired by North Star Holdings for $35 million. The moment the signed papers landed in her inbox, Kate didn't feel triumph. She felt a profound, unnerving calm. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was the one who had pushed it. She walked into the nursery and opened the door. The afternoon light streamed in, illuminating the half-built crib. She looked at it not as a symbol of abandonment, but as a project waiting to be completed. The deal closed a week later. The money, a figure so large it looked like a phone number, was transferred from her grandmother's legacy account. In return, a set of digital keys were handed over. Passwords, admin access, full unadulterated control of the entire Aura platform. She was in. Luca and Chloe, of course, knew nothing. They were in a different world, a world of likes and shares. They probably saw the news briefs in the tech journals. Struggling Elysian Labs, acquired by mystery firm North Star Holdings. They would have scrolled past it without a second thought, more concerned with their engagement metrics than with the dry realities of corporate acquisitions. They had no idea that the mystery firm was the woman they had so casually destroyed. For her first act as the new owner, Kate didn't log into the system from her laptop. She did it from her phone. She opened the Aura app, the same app that had been her tormentor. She navigated to the admin portal, a back door invisible to normal users, and entered the credentials Marcus had given her. A new screen loaded. It was the God view, the control panel, a dashboard showing real-time user activity server loads and revenue streams or lack thereof. And most importantly, it showed her the algorithm. The complex secret code that decided who got famous and who remained invisible. The code that had crowned Chloe Vance a queen. It was all there, laid bare before her. A series of weighted variables, virality score, engagement velocity, influencer tier priority. Chloe Vance and by extension Luca Reynolds, were hard-coded at the top with a Tier 1 priority flag. The algorithm was designed to push their content to the top of everyone's feed, guaranteeing them millions of views whether their content was good or not. Their success wasn't just organic. It was manufactured by the system itself. Kate's finger hovered over the screen. She could delete their accounts. She could ban them from the platform. With a single tap, she could wipe them from the digital universe they held so dear. It would be so easy, so swift. But that was too simple. It was a warrior's move, not a strategist's. Deleting them would make them martyrs. They would go to other platforms, crying censorship, and their fame would only grow. No, revenge wasn't about a single satisfying blow. It was about a slow, deliberate, and undeniable demonstration of power. She wasn't going to ban them. She was going to make them irrelevant. With a cool precision, she navigated to their user profiles within the admin panel. She saw their priority flag. Influencer / tier priority 1. She smiled a thin, cold smile. She selected the line of code. She didn't delete it. She just changed one single character. Influencer tier priority equals 0. She hit save. And just like that, the gods of the algorithm fell silent. The king and queen were now in the eyes of the machine that had made them just commoners. The effect was not immediate. An algorithm shift is not like flipping a switch. It's like changing the course of a river. For the first few days, nothing seemed different. Luca and Chloe, now living in a glass-walled rental in the Hollywood Hills, continued to post their aura-filtered fantasies. A trip to a vineyard in Napa, a candid moment of them laughing while making pasta a shot of Chloe meditating at sunrise. Kate watched not with the pained obsession of a victim, but with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. She had the master dashboard open on her second monitor at all times. She could see every metric, every data point. And she began to notice the subtle changes. Their new posts were getting slightly fewer likes in the first hour. The comment velocity was down by 15%. Before, the Aura algorithm would have force-fed their content onto millions of For You pages. Now their content had to perform on its own merits to get seen. And their merits, stripped of their artificial algorithmic boost, were proving to be remarkably thin. A week later, Chloe posted a meticulously staged photo of herself in a bubble bath surrounded by candles. In the old Auraverse, this would have been an easy 1.5 million likes. Kate watched the numbers in real time. The post struggled to hit 400,000. The first crack appeared in the comments section. "Is it me, or is Chloe's content getting kinda boring?" read one highly liked comment. Another said, "I feel like I've seen this exact photo 100 times." Chloe, who meticulously curated her comments, deleted them. But more popped up. The tide of public opinion, no longer guided by Aura's heavy hand, was starting to turn. Luca and Chloe noticed the dip. Their response was predictable. They doubled down. Their content became more frantic, more desperate for attention. They staged a fake argument and a dramatic makeup on Instagram stories. They did a tell-all YouTube video about the pressures of fame. It came off as narcissistic and whiny. Their engagement dipped further. Kate, meanwhile, was doing more than just watching. She was learning. As the sole owner, she had access to every line of code, every developer note. She spent her days understanding the intricate architecture of the platform she now controlled. She saw its flaws, its vulnerabilities, but also its immense, untapped potential. The AI was brilliant. It was just being used for the shallowest purpose imaginable. She also started subtly changing other parts of the algorithm. She instructed the system to deprioritize overly processed fantasy life content. Instead, she tweaked the variables to favor photos and videos that were tagged with things like real life, no filter, hashed mental health journey, and authenticity. She implemented a small, almost invisible boost for accounts with fewer than 10,000 followers who were getting genuine, high-quality engagement. Slowly, the entire ecosystem of Aura began to change. The For You pages, once a homogeneous stream of influencer perfection, started to fill with more diverse, more relatable content. A young mother sharing her struggles with postpartum depression, a teacher posting funny, unedited videos from his classroom, an artist showing the messy, paint-splattered process behind her work. These new creators, the ones Kate's new algorithm favored, began to rise. Aura started to feel less like a magazine of impossible lives and more like a community. The tech press started noticing. Aura's surprising shift towards authenticity, read one headline. Is the influencer bubble finally popping on Aura, read another. The app's user growth, which had started to stagnate, ticked upward again. People were responding to the change. Kate's personal life was changing too. She had found a new obstetrician closer to her apartment, a kind, reassuring man named Dr. Ben Carter. He was warm and funny with laugh lines around his eyes. During a checkup, he noticed her exhausted expression. "Long day?" he asked as he measured the baby's heartbeat. "You could say that," Kate replied with a wry smile. "Just a lot of corporate restructuring." "Ah," he said, nodding sagely. "My sister's a CEO. I know that look. Don't forget to take care of the most important startup you're running." He gestured towards her belly. "This one's funding is entirely dependent on you." His genuine care was a balm on her still healing wounds. She found herself looking forward to her appointments, to their brief, easy conversations. It was a stark contrast to the transactional, performative nature of the world she was secretly manipulating. Ben saw her as Kate, a smart, tired, expectant mother. Not a victim, not a predator, just a person. The unraveling of Lio, meanwhile, was accelerating. Their numbers were in a free fall. Having built their entire brand on Aura, they had nowhere else to go. Their attempts to replicate their success on TikTok and Instagram fell flat. They were an Aura phenomenon, and their native environment had become hostile. Desperation led them to make a fatal error. They started buying followers, a cardinal sin in the influencer world. But Kate, the owner of the platform, could see it all. On her dashboard, she saw the sudden inorganic spike in their follower count, all from botted accounts in Southeast Asia. It was pathetic. She didn't even have to do anything. Other users savvy to these tactics noticed immediately. A tech blogger using an analytics tool published an expose titled, "Have Chloe Vance and Luca Reynolds Been Faking Their Fame?" The article went viral. The hashtags #LioIsALie and #BotScandal started trending on Aura. The public backlash was savage. The couple who had been praised for their authenticity were now exposed as frauds. Their comment sections became a dumpster fire of mockery and outrage. Their big-name sponsors, the ones who had flocked to them months ago, began to pull out, citing morals clauses in their contracts. A teeth-whitening brand, a fast fashion label, a meal kit delivery service, all publicly severed ties. The financial pressure mounted. The glass-walled Hollywood house disappeared from their posts, replaced by a generic-looking apartment. Their fights, once staged for drama, were now apparently real. Paparazzi, who now smelled blood in the water, caught them arguing in a parking lot. The photos were raw and ugly, a world away from their carefully filtered aura posts. Luca looked stressed and haggard. Chloe looked furious. One evening, Kate was reviewing a proposal for a new Aura feature, a tool to help connect users with mental health resources, when a notification popped up on her work screen. It was an internal alert from the customer service department. Subject: urgent, escalated inquiry from high-profile user. Kate opened the email. It was a long, rambling, furious message from Chloe Vance. She was demanding to speak to the new owner of Aura. She claimed her account had been shadow banned and that the company was deliberately sabotaging her career. She threatened legal action, public exposure, and every other form of retribution she could think of. "My fiancé, Luca Reynolds, is a celebrated designer," she wrote, "and we have been loyal champions of your platform. This unprofessional treatment is unacceptable. We demand a meeting with the CEO of North Star Holdings to discuss a path forward." Kate leaned back in her chair. Her baby kicked a gentle but firm reminder. A path forward. They wanted a path forward. It was time. She forwarded the email to Marcus Thorne. Her instructions were simple. "Arrange the meeting. My boardroom. Next Tuesday." The headquarters of North Star Holdings, and by extension Aura, was not the trendy open-plan loft one might expect from a tech company. On Kate's instruction, Marcus had leased the top floor of a stark, imposing skyscraper in the heart of San Francisco's financial district. The aesthetic was deliberate, old money quiet power, and impenetrable steel. The boardroom was Kate's stage. It was a vast, intimidating space, dominated by a long, dark mahogany table. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city and the bay. The other walls were bare, save for a single, massive screen, currently dark. Kate arrived an hour early. She was now nearly 9 months pregnant, and she moved with a slow, deliberate grace. She wore a simple, elegant black maternity dress. No power suit, no armor. Her presence was her power. She stood by the window looking down at the traffic crawling below, feeling the baby move within her. She was calm. The chaotic emotions of the past few months had been distilled into a single purpose. This was not about revenge. It was about closing a loop, about demonstrating a fact that real life, with all its pain and messiness, would always triumph over a curated fantasy. Marcus met her in the boardroom. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this face-to-face, Kate? I can handle it." "I'm sure," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is my story. I'm going to be the one to write the ending." At precisely 10 a.m. the door opened. A junior executive showed in Chloe Vance and Luca Reynolds. The sight of them in the flesh was jarring. They were smaller somehow than their digital avatars. Chloe was dressed in a tight, expensive-looking blazer, her face a mask of professionally applied makeup, but there were dark circles under her eyes. She radiated a tense, defiant energy. Luca was a ghost. His trendy clothes hung on a frame that had lost weight. His charming smile was gone, replaced by a haggard, anxious expression. He avoided looking around the room, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he saw Kate standing by the window. His face went white. He stopped dead, his mouth falling open slightly. He looked from her to her swollen belly, then back to her face. The color drained from his cheeks. Recognition, shock, and a dawning, sickening horror played out across his features. Chloe, who had been striding towards the head of the table as if to claim it, noticed Luca's paralysis. "What is it?" she snapped, irritated. Then she followed his gaze. Her reaction was different. There was no horror, only pure, unadulterated confusion, quickly followed by a flash of contempt. "Kate, what the hell are you doing here? Are you the secretary?" Kate didn't answer. She simply walked towards the head of the table, the seat Chloe had been about to take, and sat down. Marcus took the seat at her right. "Chloe." "Luca," Kate said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, silent room. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Luca stumbled into a chair, his eyes still locked on Kate's face. Chloe remained standing, her arms crossed. "I don't understand. We're here to see the CEO of North Star Holdings." "What is this?" "You are," Kate said calmly. "I am the sole owner and CEO of North Star Holdings. I acquired Elysian Labs 3 months ago. Welcome to my company." The silence that followed was absolute. Chloe's jaw tightened, her perfectly glossed lips pressed into a thin line. The contempt in her eyes was replaced by a look of disbelief and then a flicker of fear. Luca looked like he was going to be physically sick. He finally tore his gaze away from Kate and stared at the polished surface of the table as if it were a life raft. "You—" Chloe finally spat out a harsh, incredulous laugh, escaping her. "You bought Aura how?" "My grandmother was a very wise woman," Kate said simply. She gestured to the large screen on the wall. "But we're not here to discuss my finances. We're here to discuss yours." With a tap on her tablet, the screen flickered to life. It displayed Aura's master dashboard. It was a sea of data charts and graphs. To Luca and Chloe, it would have been incomprehensible. But Kate knew it was the story of their lives. "Let's talk about your brand," Kate began, her voice taking on the crisp, analytical tone of her old job. "This graph shows your engagement metrics over the past year." A jagged line appeared on the screen. It shot up dramatically around the time Luca had left her, then plummeted 3 months ago. "This spike," she said, pointing a laser from her tablet, "is where the Elysian Labs algorithm was manually coded to give your accounts Tier 1 priority. Your fame wasn't earned, it was assigned." She switched to another screen, showing a world map covered in red dots. "And this is your follower base, or what's left of it. As you can see, 47% of your followers are bots originating from click farms in Dhaka and Manila purchased on—" She paused, looking at her notes. "The 17th of last month, a direct violation of our terms of service." She brought up their most recent posts. "Your content's performance when stripped of artificial priority and fake followers is in the bottom percentile of our user base. To be blunt, your brand is worthless." Chloe was shaking her head, her face pale beneath her tan. "You did this. You sabotaged us." "No," Kate said, her voice devoid of malice. It was the voice of pure fact. "I didn't sabotage you. I restored neutrality. I took away your cheat codes. I created a level playing field, and on it you failed. Because what you built was never real. It was a fantasy propped up by a system I now control." Finally, Luca spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Kate, I didn't know." Kate turned her full attention to him for the first time. She looked at him, the father of her child, the man who had shattered her world with a text message. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a profound, weary pity. "You didn't know," she repeated softly. "You didn't know that leaving your pregnant wife for a woman you'd only just met was wrong. You didn't know that building a new life on a foundation of lies and curated photos might be unsustainable. I'm sorry." He choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "Ames, I am so sorry. I was lost. I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did," Kate agreed. "And now you have to live with it." She turned her gaze back to Chloe, who was now staring at her with pure, venomous hatred. "So what now?" Chloe demanded. "Are you going to delete our accounts? Is that what this is all about? Petty revenge?" Kate almost smiled. It was so much bigger than that. "Deleting you would be a waste of server space," she said coolly. "Your accounts will remain active. You are free to post whatever you like. But you will be subject to the same algorithm as every other user. You will have to find out for the first time if anyone is actually interested in what you have to say." She stood up, her movement commanding the room. "But this meeting isn't just about you. It's about the future of this platform. Aura became a tool for envy and illusion, and I am changing that." The screen behind her changed again. It now showed mock-ups of a new app interface. It was cleaner, warmer. The focus was on community, on connection, on authenticity. "I am officially announcing the Aura Authenticity Initiative. We are partnering with the National Center for Mental Health to integrate resources into the app. We are launching a creator fund, the Eleanor Reed Grant, to provide capital to small independent artists and storytellers who are focused on genuine, unfiltered content. 10% of all future profits from this company will be donated to charities supporting single mothers and their children." She looked directly at Luca, her voice unwavering. "This platform will no longer be a celebration of the fantasies people escape to. It will be a celebration of the real lives they actually lead. The messy ones, the hard ones, the beautiful, authentic ones." She had taken their weapon, the engine of their fame, and her pain, and she had reforged it into a shield for people like her. "The meeting is over," Kate said. "The executive assistant will validate your parking." Chloe was speechless, her rage rendering her mute. Luca just sat there, broken. As a security guard escorted them out of the boardroom, Luca looked back one last time, his face a mask of regret and awe. He wasn't looking at his ex-wife. He was looking at a force of nature he had foolishly underestimated. When they were gone, Marcus turned to Kate. "That," he said, "was the most brutal and elegant takedown I have ever witnessed." Kate walked back to the window, placing a hand on her belly. She watched two tiny figures get into a cab far below. She didn't feel a rush of victory or a thrill of revenge. She just felt peaceful. The loop was closed. The story was hers again. 2 weeks later, Kate gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Eleanor. In the end, this was never a story about getting even. It was a story about getting whole. Kate didn't just buy an app. She bought back her own narrative. She took the very tool that was used to discard her and transformed it into a platform for authenticity and a force for good, building a legacy for her daughter on the foundations of her own resilience. Luca and Chloe learned the hard way that a life built on filters is bound to fade, while a life built on truth, however difficult, is the only one that lasts. What do you think? Was Kate's move an act of brilliant revenge or a masterclass in business? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by this story of strength and transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories of incredible people.